All right. Good evening. Yes, this week is week 20. I think I told somebody a couple days ago we were like in number 18 or whatever, but we're not. It's the 20th week of our walk through the Bible. We are cruising right along in Exodus chapter 16 and 17 is where we're going to be. I'm calling this week the test of the Omer. Last week we talked about this transition time of the people of Israel. They have been delivered from Egypt. They've been called to be the Behor, the firstborn of God, the chosen people of God, and now He's testing them. And the rabbinical tradition says that there are 3 tests on the way to Sinai, and we talked last week in chapters 14 and 15 about that first test. The first test is the test of their lavav, their heart, the heart of a person, and it's the call of God, right, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and might. The 3 words are lavav, nefesh, and meod. And we're going to get to the latter 2 today, nefesh and meod, the tests on the way. And we're going to be in Exodus chapter 16 and 17. Shameless plug right here. If you are in town this coming Sunday, you should come and join us. I'm excited about the people who are coming. They're fresh back from Rwanda. They are with the group Advocates for Africa. We'll be talking with us about this, about their school and the work that they're doing, a nationally recognized school and education program for Rwandans and helping rebuild a country and build up next generation of believers who are capable to impact the marketplace. It is a really, really cool work that they're doing, and they just got back. Literally, I think like today or yesterday, they got back. They landed back in the U.S. from Rwanda, and so it's going to be really cool to get a chance to interact with them and them to be able to give us information about the progress and how we can partner with them moving forward. So be here and be a part of it. I'm excited about that. So very, very cool. So here we are, fresh off this testing. And what did we say about testing last week? Naturally, our understanding of test is pass-fail, right? That's our natural inclination. That is not what God is doing. God is doing a work to test His people, to reveal the truth of what's going on. And God has called His people to trust Him with all their heart. And the heart, we talk about heart, and we think of it in our Western culture as like the seat of emotion, with all of our emotion, but that's not what God has called and what historically they would have understood. When God challenges these people to trust Him and to follow Him with all their heart, He is talking about their will. With everything that is in them, the will that they have, the desire that they have, this is where worship comes from. The heart, from the will of a person, the intentionality and what we're going to do. And so we talked about this test, right, with the waters of Mara, and they end up at the 12 springs of Elim, with the 70 palm trees. And if they will just trust God and the intention of God, and they will have the will and the wherewithal to trust the direction and order of God, He will take us to more than enough, even in the desert. Not that that's a place that He wants us to stay, but He's going to provide for more than enough for us along the way, right? So here we are in the desert, in Elim. And we're going to pick up the story in Exodus chapter 16 and verse 1. It says that they set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the people of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. And on the 15th day of the second month, after they had departed from the land of Egypt, and the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness, and the people of Israel said to them, Would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Here's the thing. We are so quick in our American culture to look at this complaint right after God has just provided for them clean water in the desert, and then an abundance of water and shade in the desert, which is not normal. He has just delivered them with a mighty hand out of the hand of Egypt, out of the control of Pharaoh. He has split the Red Sea and they have walked across on dry ground. They have just seen all of these miracles, and now here we are just a few days later. They're complaining about not having meat and bread, right? But I have to ask the question, do they need meat? Do they need meat? It's what they're used to. Absolutely. What did they leave Egypt with? Huh? Cattle, sheep, goats, camels. That's a whole bunch of meat. So what are they complaining about? Have you ever thought about this? Like, we immediately go, well, there are people who are wandering in the desert. Okay, yes, but they left Egypt with everything that they wanted. Like, this is really about what they want. This is really about their complaint to God of, well, this is how we had it before, and this is what the God of the Nile, this is what the God King Pharaoh made sure that we had. We sat around potted meat. We had meat all the time, and you're like, you have a cow. Seems like you've got something, right? That's right. Who did prepare that meat before? Somebody had to, right? They had to. Like, this is quite an interesting complaint that they have standing in front of Moses and Aaron. That's right. They wanted it provided without their effort. Yeah, they are like kids. Were you going to say something? Yeah. It was holy wood. Yeah. If we use it, we won't have it anymore. Like, if we kill our cows now, we won't have any cows left. I mean, this is I've read through this story numerous times, and I've contemplated this particular story a lot of times, and never once did I go, what? What? They have cows. They definitely still have cows because they're going to slaughter one and offer it as a sacrifice at Sinai. And they're going to be instructed to slaughter goats and bulls and sheep in the process of getting the instructions for the temple. They have to be able to actually uphold that tradition. Yes, every family had to have something like. So everybody there's an abundance of meat to eat. That's the question, right? Man, that's so good. If I use it all right now, what do I have left? But here's okay, so this is so good. All right. Then the Lord said to Moses. So these people are complaining to Moses, and then the Lord speaks to Moses, and he's like, all right, here's the deal. Behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them. Interesting. Whether they will walk in my law or not. On the sixth day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily. So Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, at evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumblings against the Lord. Who were they grumbling against? So they make the statement to Moses, but Moses knows who's actually leading them. And he knows that, hey, if you're grumbling against me, you're grumbling against God. That's who's leading us. This is like the classic employee complaint department, right? An employee complains about their manager, and they will complain about their manager, and they don't realize they're complaining about the people who are signing their checks, not their manager. Their manager has someone who's telling them what to do, right? So this is like the classic employee, man, I have the worst manager. If I did their job, I could manage this so much more. And you're like, so much better. Okay, but your manager has a boss who's actually the one in charge and giving direction. And if you're complaining to that guy, you're complaining about him to him. It's kind of a weird deal. So here they are complaining to Moses realistically about God. And Moses comes, and they're like, well, we complained about you. And Moses comes back to them and says, well, you guys are grumbling against God. And here's what he's going to do. And I really do think it's interesting. Maybe you've never caught this, but he says, in the evening, you're going to see, and then in the morning, you're going to see. Does that remind you of anything? Back in Genesis, God says, it's evening and morning, evening and morning. See, our day starts right in the morning. Anyway, God is starting to show himself in the evening and then follows it up in the morning. Echoes back to Genesis 1. Before I move on from this, I'll finish that verse. For what are we that you grumble against us? That's the statement of Moses. What did God tell Moses that he was going to do? He's going to rain bread from heaven. That's what he said to Moses he was going to do. And Moses said in verse 8, when the Lord gives you in the evening, what does it say? When the Lord gives you in the evening meat to eat. Like, the instruction of God never said anything about meat. God said it's going to rain down bread. And Moses says he's going to show up in the evening and in the morning. And Moses speaks, like, it gives this implication. Moses says, why are you grumbling against the Lord? Who are we that you grumble against us? And then there's a pause, right? What does that imply, Chelsea? That there was a break, but it's as a, like, well, you guys aren't saying anything. You don't have any response to that, so I'm going to go on, right? There's a pause, and there's like, okay. But in the evening, you're going to have meat to eat. And in the morning, bread to the full, because the Lord has heard your grumbling, that you grumble against him. What are we? Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord. Then Moses says to Aaron, say to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, come near before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. And as soon as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the people of Israel. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God. As if they don't know already, you're going to know again. You're going to yada, you're going to experience that I am the Lord your God. So in the evening, quail came up and covered the camp. And in the morning, dew lay around the camp. And when the dew had gone up, there was on the face of the wilderness a fine flake-like thing, fine as frost on the ground. And when the people of Israel saw it, they said to one another, what is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses had commanded, and Moses said to them, it is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. That is what the Lord has commanded. Gather of it, each one of you, as much as he can eat. You shall each take an Omer. What is an Omer? It's a measurement. It's probably a Jewish measurement, or not Jewish, an Egyptian measurement. There's an Egyptian measurement called a homer. And depending on the era, it was somewhere between about a cup and 2 quarts, which is a pretty broad range. But it was somewhere between a cup and 2 quarts. So we'll call it about a quart of bread for each person.
Wasn't it just going to be enough to satisfy a person, right?
It was enough for a person for a day.
So gather enough for per person, family.
Yeah, so let's talk. We're going to talk through this. Let's finish this portion, and we'll talk through how do we understand this. Measure it with an omer. Whoever gathered much had take an omer according to the number of the persons that each of you has in his tent. And the people of Israel did so. They gathered, some of them more, some of them less. But when they measured it with an omer, whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. Each of them gathered as much as he could eat. And Moses said to them, let no one leave any over till the morning. But they did not listen to Moses, and some left part of it until the morning, and it bred worms and stank. And Moses was angry with them. And morning by morning they gathered it, each as much as he could eat. But when the sun grew hot, it melted. So there's a couple of things that we often talk about. We often refer to this period of time when we immediately go, these people are just not listening. They have seen the glory of God and they still refuse to listen. Except for verse 17 says, and the people of Israel did so. Like they were given command of how to gather the bread, the manna, and they did it. And here's what's really interesting. How do you read that next part? How do you read that next part? I think there's 2 ways to look at it. Everybody who went out and gathered, somehow the miracle was, if they went out and gathered a little bit, there was enough. And if they went out and gathered a lot, like they were greedy or extra hungry, they had enough. But the rabbis teach that's not the way that you interpret this. That's not the way we hear this. The rabbis associate this teaching, this miracle, which it absolutely was a daily miracle. Not the appearing of the manna, but the manna being enough. And here's how they look at it. Every one of these tests, every one of the challenges of God is about community. And when God says that He's after their levav, their heart, there is a statute and a rule that is associated with the first test. And that is to care for the marginalized, the widows, and the orphans, and the sick first. They brought them to the waters of Mara. They were made pure, and they gave water to those people first. They nourished and cared for those people first. So what we see is a group of people who there are sick, unhealthy, unable-bodied people among this group of people who have been led out into the wilderness. Yes? So the way that they say we should read this is all these people went out and gathered for all the people. And when all of it was brought together and an omer was measured out for each one, there was enough for everybody. Nobody went without. That is a pretty significant happening, isn't it? That some people went out and did extra work to gather extra so that those who were... So it gives us the indication that not only were there sick and unhealthy and unable-bodied people, but there were people who honored the way of God and the command of God and intentionally went out and gathered extra so that everybody had enough.
But we know, though, that it said for everyone in the tent would be. So you have to think that if you had a crippled grandmother or
Yeah, she's in the tent with them. Yeah.
so they would have to gather for her and themselves, or enough for everybody.
Does that mean like you have a group of kids following with a basket and somebody who has an omer measuring cup? And they would like fill it up and like, that's an omer for me. And we've got a list of how many people are in our tent, or there's the neighbors are sickly today, so I'm going to take an extra couple of kids with me, and we've got a count of how many people are in their tent, and we're going to gather for them as well. But this is the idea of community, how they cared for one another, right?
And they did, which means they followed that instruction.
Yeah, they honored God, they honored the heart of God for the weak and the lowly by gathering enough, and there was always enough for everybody who was in need. And then when it got hot and the stuff started to spoil, it went away, and nobody went hungry.
The only time it spoiled is when they left it in their jar.
When they kept it, when they got extra. And here's the thing. They could have, just like you and I, there are some days that we are a little more hungry than others. And there are some days that our eyes are a little bigger than our stomach, especially if you have young kids. Young kids at a buffet load up a plate and you're like, sure you're going to eat all that? And then they get halfway through it and they're like, I don't know if I'm going to make it. Right? Like there's just all kinds of stuff that goes on. Well, in this case, all that's left over just goes bad. It just goes bad. Come on in. And it stank and it went bad. And if they tried to save it till the next day. Yep. It didn't go bad on the ground. If it wasn't collected, it says that it melted away. But if it was collected and not consumed and not used, then it stank and grew worms. It says bread worms in this, but like it became worms and nastiness. Whew.
But then, when it comes to quail, it doesn't say.
Right. It doesn't say that the quail went bad because, like, this isn't Quail-mageddon. This is just quail. Came up and covered the ground. Like, yeah. Take whatever quail you want. Some people were vegan, didn't eat the quail. Probably not true, but then on the sixth day, they gathered twice as much, and they went to go get. Some people went to go collect it on the Sabbath day, but God was like, "Nope, not going to provide any." They go out to look for stuff, and they're like, "There's nothing here." And Moses is like, "Well, I told you there wasn't going to be any." That's right, right? Like their initial response is like, "Hey, it's going to spoil. It's going to spoil. Last time I tried to take extra, it spoiled." But isn't this that same conversation, right? God was putting these people to the test because it was, or these people were putting God to the test in saying, we're demanding our type of meat. We used to sit around pot of meat. And the reason I can say that with pretty good certainty of this is how this is understood later on is when we flip over to Psalm chapter 78 and we look in verse 17. Because Moses is kind of given a warning when he instructs them, hey, who are we? Why are you grumbling at us about meat and bread? Like God knows who you are and what you need, and He's going to provide enough. Why would you put God to the test? Verse 27 of Exodus 16 says, on the seventh day some of the people went out together, but they found none. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the sixth day He gives you bread for 2 days. Remain each of you in his place, and let no one go out of his place on the seventh day. So the people rested on the seventh day. So now the house of Israel called its name manna or manha. It was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. And Moses said, this is what the Lord has commanded. Let an omer of it be kept throughout your generations, so that they may see the bread with which I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. And that ended up being put in the Ark of the Covenant, in a bowl. An omer. Never bred worms, stayed forever. Pretty miraculous. And Moses said to Aaron, take a jar and put an omer of manna in it and place it before the Lord to be kept throughout your generations. As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron placed it before the testimony. The people of Israel ate the manna 40 years till they came to a habitable land. They ate the manna till they came to the border of the land of Canaan. An omer is the 10th part of an ephah. They still had cattle. That is correct. So what's going on here? Well, when we flip over to Psalm chapter 78, we start in verse 17. Looking back, this is the inspiration of the psalm and the declaration. It says, yet they sinned still more against him, rebelling against the Most High in the desert. They tested God in their heart by demanding the food that they craved. They demanded a specific kind of meat because we keep going back to this fact, they had meat with them. But they wanted God to prove Himself to be true again, even though He had already proven Himself. They were like, no, we need you to provide it supernaturally. Wasn't it supernatural enough that you left Egypt with those animals? You need those animals and another supernatural provision of meat. Is that what we're going with? Because that sounds like that's what we're getting at. They tested God in their hearts by demanding the food they craved. They spoke against God, saying, can God spread a table in the wilderness? He struck the rock so that water gushed out and streams overflowed. Can He also give us bread or provide meat for His people? Therefore, when the Lord heard, He was full of wrath, and a fire was kindled against Jacob. His anger rose against Israel because they did not believe in God and did not trust his saving power. This is what Moses is warning them against. Hey, be careful and don't test God. Don't tempt him. You're already grumbling. Stop it. Trust his provision. Trust his word. He is asking you to trust him with all of your will, with all of your heart, with all of your intention. Chase after him. But God is now testing not just their will, not just their lavav, their heart. He is now testing their nefesh, their soul, the essence of who they are. Are you going to trust God with your everyday provision, with everything that is you? Are you going to trust him? And that's the challenge of the people of God. They're testing God by saying, you haven't provided enough for us for today. We're going to die. As opposed to trusting God that he is going to sustain them even right now. And this is the challenge, like what you talked about. We do this right now. They got led out. They have these cattle. But if I slaughter these cattle and we start to eat them, I don't have anything left. If I invest all that I have in surviving today, I don't have anything for tomorrow. We're so worried about tomorrow and our impending doom that we don't trust God for today. And the Bible says we put God to the test this way. Just like the people of Israel who were grumbling against, well, we were in captivity, yeah, but at least Pharaoh provided us with pots of meat to sit around with plenty of bread, and we never went hungry. Well, I understand it's hot and uncomfortable and challenging, and there's no sign of civilization anywhere. If you took a wrong turn, yeah. But here we are in Rephidim, hiding in our tents from the heat, complaining to God that you've brought us out here to die. This constant refrain of, but it's God testing his people on the way to Sinai to say, do you love me with all your heart? Do you love me with all your soul? Do you trust me? Because they did not believe in God and did not trust his saving power. Even though they didn't trust him, even though they were angry, you know what God did? Yet he commanded the skies above and opened the doors of heaven, and he rained down on them manna to eat and gave them grain of heaven. And man ate of the bread of the angels, and he sent them food in abundance. He caused the east wind to blow in the heavens, and by his power he led out the south wind. He rained meat on them like dust, winged birds like the sands of the seas. He let them fall in the midst of their camp all around their dwellings. Like, that is a supernatural happening. Hey, there's a couple million people out here in the middle of nowhere. You know where there are not birds? In the middle of a couple million people out in the middle of nowhere. But the winds blow, and these quail fall and cover the ground of their camp. In response to their grumbling and complaining and their lack of faith. But he's a judgmental, hateful, angry God.
And he does it for 40 years.
Does it for 40 years. Verse 29 says, and they ate and were well filled, and he gave them what they craved. But before they had satisfied their craving, while the food was still in their mouths, the anger of God rose against them, and he killed the strongest of them and laid low the young men of Israel.
Was that a response to, even though you give them everything they want, they never stop?
They never stop their grumbling. That's a response to that. Like God is giving them more than enough. He, in the response to their lack of faith, is providing even more. And they're like, nah. The fact that Moses said, hey, I'm going to give, like, if you'll just be faithful, if you'll just be silent and stay where you are and listen and watch, in this evening, you're going to see God. And in the morning, you're going to see God so that you will know that it was God who is with us. And they were like, huh. Yeah, like a bunch of spoiled brats. And here we find Moses. We're still on this. God is still testing them. He's still testing their soul. Because what does man need? Man can't live by what alone? The book of Deuteronomy says, bread alone. Can't live by bread alone. So God's providing bread and meat. That statement of bread, you can't live by sustenance alone. You can't just live by what they take in. That's not going to just keep a person, it'll keep a person alive, but it won't allow them to live. So here they are. Exodus 17, verse 1. All the congregation of the people of Israel moved on from the wilderness of Sin by stages, according to the commandment of the Lord, and camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people quarreled with Moses and said, give us water to drink. And Moses said to them, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord? But the people thirsted there for water, and the people grumbled against Moses and said, why did you bring us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst? You have livestock and you're still complaining about food. Like, we're still at this. Here's what's interesting. It says, in a call back to what we just read in Psalm 78, these people are putting the Lord to the test. They are exposing, like, God tests to expose our heart, to allow us opportunity for repentance and redemption and restoration. That's how God tests. And that's why God tests us. These people are testing God for Him to prove that He is who He says He is. Like, this is truly, people test other people for a true pass-fail. Like, they are trying to put God in a place where He is either going to come through and pass this test and we're going to believe Him, or He's not. The problem is, they don't ever actually all the way believe Him. They just keep testing Him. And we hear this story. And it's really crazy, because in response to these declarations from the people, Moses ze'ekahs to God. You remember that word? He cries out. He ze'ekahs. He is fearful for his life. And people are like, oh, it's hyperbole. I don't think so. I don't think so. The Hebrew term used here, ze'ekah, is indicating to us that Moses is genuinely afraid that these people are going to try to take his life if something doesn't change. And so what does God do? God sends Moses to go to the rock. Now, here's something interesting. It's Sinai is where He's sending him. Sending them to the mountain of Sinai. And in this region, it's very sandy. And you're like, well, how would they not know? How would they know when they got to a mountain? Well, it's because in this region, it's all sandy, and then the mountain peaks just shoot up out of the sand. It's like walking, mountain. You know when you're at the base of this mountain. It's not like you're in Colorado Springs and you're like, well, I'm going to go get close to Pikes Peak. Well, when you go from one side of Colorado Springs to the other side, which is like almost 15 miles, it seems like, you're at a higher elevation on the other side. So it's like, well, what grade do you consider like the base of Pikes Peak before you start really going up the mountain? Like, how does that work? This would be no question. You're at a flat, sandy area, and it juts up out of the ground. Massive rock formations. Okay? Another interesting thing is there are like 19 different possible Mount Sinai areas. Hebron, or not Hebron. What do they call it? Horeb. Horeb, it's this area. There's like 19 different potential sites of Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai. The most theologically and academically accepted one of those 19 from where Rephidim is to that mountain is 17 miles. So if you're at this place and people are like, we need water, and God's like, I will provide water. Moses, go on a 17-mile hike and take the elders of Israel with you. We're really close to water, guys. It's only 17 miles. But God's leading Moses away from the congregation of the people to protect him. And he's leading the people, the leaders of the houses of Israel, to a place where they have to see what's going on. Because what's going on is these people are being rebellious and they are putting God to the test. And if we understand what happens along the way, what would we expect to see God do? We would expect God to bring judgment. Yes? Somebody is going to pay the price. And this is true all throughout Scripture. When rebellion and testing of God, look back to the Tower of Babel, look back to prior to the flood, look back to Sodom and Gomorrah. Like when people are hurting other people and challenging God, what happens? God responds with judgment. So in this story, we should expect that to happen, but God does something very different. He tells Moses via. God says, come to me and via my rock. God says in response to their rebellion, in response to the people that are called by my name testing me, I want you to lead them to this dry place. I want you to take them away from where they are to this mountain. And I want you to take that stick and I want you to strike me. And out of you striking me, the provision that they need will come. God calls Moses in response to the rebellion and the testing of the people of God to come and strike him for their provision and their redemption and their more than enough. It is impossible to walk through this understanding that without looking forward to the New Testament. these shades of who Jesus is. That in response to your sinfulness, your testing of Him, your idolatry, your hatefulness, your selfishness, God says, no, strike me and I'll pay the price. So when they pierce the side of Jesus and blood and water flows. Yeah. Same place they camped, yeah. That's right. That's right. Yeah, they did camp. The center point was the place of God, the place of sacrifice, and when they're around Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai, that's where they start that encampment. The mountain is in the middle, and they are in the direction of a cross, and it's quite an impressive happening. Hey, get back! I'm going to kill them all. Yeah, and, and it's quite a happening here. And he leads Moses to deliver provision, but he leads the elders to be people who recognize this is the character of God. This is the essence of who God is. In spite of your wrong, you're testing him, you're quarreling with him. He asks Moses as our leader with that shepherd's staff, that staff of leadership, to strike him, and out of that strike he provides everything that we need. He provides for our well-being. This is the character of God. This is what God is calling his people to when he says that he's testing their nefesh, their soul. The essence of who they are, the character of who we are. Will we trust God with our nefesh? And then it's piggybacked with the next test. And I'll give a synopsis of it as we walk through it. These people, the Amalekites, they are a band of raiders. They see people, they're desert raiders. They sneak up on groups of people in the desert and they jump them from behind. Do you know why they jump people from behind? That's where the weakest and the most frail and the most vulnerable are. This is exactly how lions hunt. This is how any predator in the wild pretty much hunts, especially when they're hunting groups that are in packs. They drive them and they try to pick off whatever's in the back because they're the weak and they're frail and the easiest target. And this is what happens. The Amalekites show up to fight against the people of Israel, and they're attacking them from the rear to try to take out what they can. They're just trying to kill off people and take all the goods that they can get their hands on. Chances are there's also quite a bit of livestock at the back end of this. And God judges the Amalekites for this action later on in Deuteronomy. He's like, don't forget those Amalekites. Don't forget those Amalekites and what they did to you in the desert. As a matter of fact, in response to this, God changes the organization of the people, and he gives the tribe of Dan the responsibility of being on the back end of their wandering through the desert. And he takes the widows and the orphans and the livestock and the helpless, and he puts them in the middle. And on either side, they project strength. Because God is still committed to hospitality and caring for the widows and the orphans and the marginalized. And so here's what we see. When the Amalekites come and they fight against them, God tells Moses what he's going to do, and Moses turns to Joshua, and I'm going to, verse 8. Then, chapter 17, verse 8. Then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. So Moses said to Joshua, choose for us men and go out and fight with Amalek. And tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed. But whenever he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew weary, so they took a stone and put it under him and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side. So his hands were steady until the going down of the sun, and Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the sword. And then the Lord said to Moses, write this as a memorial in a book and recite it in the ears of Joshua, that I utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called the name of it, the Lord is my banner, or the Lord Jehovah Nisi, saying, a hand upon the throne of the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. So here's what happened. If we read this, the way this is written in the ESV, which is what I just read it out of, it's the most accurately translated. But the Jewish and rabbinical tradition says that it says choose for us, that for us doesn't have to go there. There's another placement for those two words in the English translation. The most accurate rendition of that is choose men and go out and fight for us with Amalek. God is testing the might, the mayod, the mayod of the people. And we translate it as might or strength, but it is not. That's not the actual word. This word mayod is actually first introduced in Scripture in Genesis chapter 1. I think it's tav mayod. And the Lord saw what was done on the first day, and he says it is tav. It's good. And on the second day is tav. It's good. And on the sixth day, he saw all that he had created, and it is tav mayod. It is very good. Very good. So, mayod, God is testing not just their lavav, their heart, and not just their nefesh, their soul and their essence, but God is testing their very, which is a crazy thing. Testing their very. And what does this mean? It means God is calling his people to lay everything on the line to fight for the community and the good of the whole. God wants to know, will you fight with me in mind? Because he asks, choose men and go out and fight for us. The test of God is whether or not they would take their might, their strength, and risk everything that they have and put it on the line for his glory. And you're like, well, how do you get to that point? Well, this word Nisi, Jehovah Nisi. A Nisi is a banner. But it's kind of interesting because it's not really what you would think. We're like, well, it's a banner. It's a covering over us. Nope, it's not. In Egyptian history, which again, this is their culture that they're coming out of. In Egyptian culture, the cities were built that as you were coming up to them, they had a large door, and over that door was an image of their God. And on the pillars of that door were these nises, these banners that pointed to their God. So as they're walking, they knew the service and who they were committed to. So when these people are fighting in the valley against Amalek and they turn and they look up, their victory is coming from where? From God, because this banner, this staff of God, and the hands of Moses is upright and pointing above him. And so they knew that their victory didn't come from Moses. It came, Moses acting as that banner, pointing to their God, is the God that is over all things, that has no limit. Because remember, on the backside of him would have been what? That glory cloud. The presence of God himself. The embodiment, right? They've had this pillar of fire by night and this pillar of cloud by day that recognized who they were. And earlier in the story, it says, here they are at Rephidim, and God shows up in that pillar, yes? The presence of God shows up. So this banner, this pointing of victory is coming from the source and who is God. And God has called his people to risk everything, to put their very on the line, their everything on the line for his glory. So when God says he's challenging us, when he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and what we recognize as strength or might, it's actually lavav, all your heart. It is nefesh, all your soul. And meod, all of your very. That's the call of God. Are we willing to surrender everything that we have to him, trust him for our survival, and in that process, trusting him with our soul, right? Are we willing to trust him with our very? Are we willing to take everything that he has put in our hands and put it on the line for him to be proven to be our victory? For his name to be glorified? For people to look back at us and understand that we are pointing to a God who is above all other gods. That's a great place to leave off. We're going to have a little bit of time of discussion, but if you're not here, come and join us. We're going to be back next week. If you are in town, come and join us Sunday morning as we hear about what God is doing in Rwanda and how we can participate in being a part of sending the gospel across the world. Have a blessed